Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on the Twitters. And there he is. Everybody knows the dean over there, Steven Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. Steven, how's it going, my man?
Mike, it's going great. We've hit that final stretch of the season. You can feel it with the playoff rankings coming up. But before we get to the playoff rankings, or well, I guess it's after, we still got some big SEC showdowns, two big ones this weekend. So just trying to take it all in. You know, the season goes by fast, and here we are. It's already November. Before we know it, we'll be talking about bowl games. So enjoy it.
Yeah, no doubt, Steven. And man, so much intrigue with these first playoff rankings in the 12-team era. And once you know it, Steven, there's no elite teams, apparently, in the SEC at least. So I wanted to start right there because we got a lot to cover. We got Steven's updated playoff projections. We're going to get those before the committee does. Steven's panic meter. Can't wait to see who's on the panic meter before we preview this epic weekend of SEC action, Steven, that I'm calling Eliminator Saturday. We got to give it the cheesy tagline there, and that's what it is this week. But before we dive into all that, got to let the fine folks know, as always, we're brought to you by MyBookie, the online sports book. Head on over to mybookie.ag today and put in that promo code, that SEC, THAT-SEC, to double, Steven, double, just like a double cousin curse over here, double your initial deposit at MyBookie with that promo code, that SEC. Steven, I believe, did you have Tennessee as your lock? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I did.
Fade me. I had the same dang thing. Fade Steven, and you'll win over at MyBookie. But again,
we both had, I think, pick Vanderbilt to win. Why did neither of us take it as a lock, right? Even if they didn't win, you had to feel good about them covering. What are we doing?
I didn't want to use my lock powers to bewitch Diego Pavia. I wanted him to win that bad over Hugh on the Plains.
I think that Pavia magic just overcomes anything else, right? I mean, he slayed Alabama of all things, right?
Yeah, exactly. But before we get into all that, Steven, I wanted to throw this your way real quick. This is the updated SEC standings. We covered this at the tail end of last week, but I'm going to run through these real quick. A&M and Georgia tied for first place at 5-1. And again, this is just conference records. Tennessee is in sole possession of third place with a 4-1 record. LSU, Texas tied at fourth with 3-1 records. Vanderbilt, Alabama, Ole Miss tied at 6 with they're each 3-2 in the conference. South Carolina's and Arkansas's at 9, 3-3 each. Missouri, number 11, 2-2. Florida, 12 at 2-3. Oklahoma, 13th, 1-4. Auburn, 14th, 1-5. Kentucky, 15th, 1-6, and Mississippi State last with an 0-5 conference record. What stands out to you as we head into Week 11 with these SEC standings?
I think the first thing is sort of parity almost. Nobody in the conference is undefeated at this point. You could point to a lot of things. I think obviously Nick Saban retiring at Alabama, a little bit more parity overall with the transfer portal, coaching changes, also conference realignment, no division. So just kind of not seeing an undefeated team in SEC play is a little weird at this point. Also seeing Vanderbilt at 6, tied for 6 is very striking to me. Not Vanderbilt ahead of Oklahoma or Auburn or maybe even Missouri, Kentucky at this point of the year. So really nice job for Clark Lee. The other thing that jumps out to me is you see the standings and you see Texas A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas. They're in the top 4 or tied or in the top 4. It really feels like we got some key games this weekend, but looming down the road, if you want to boil this down to something very basic, it feels like Georgia versus Tennessee, Texas versus Texas A&M are almost de facto play-in games for the SEC championship. Now, of course, that means that those teams have to win the other games on their schedule,
right.
But we're probably trending in that direction. So, man, the chase to get the spots in Atlanta is going to be unbelievable down the stretch because I think, as we've seen all year, don't assume the most perfect, easiest path is going to play out for anybody.
Right. And who knows, Stephen? I mean, you can't even write off Vanderbilt, Alabama, and Ole Miss. I'm not saying they're, favorites to do anything, but if they went out, who knows? They could get themselves into contention, and you may not even want to make the SEC championship. What you really want to do is, of course, make the college football playoff, in my opinion. But this is just wild, and the fact that there's no divisions. I loved it at first. I'm starting to regret it because I think we're going to get some wild tiebreaker here to determine who's going to make the SEC championship. But man, this season's going off the rails quickly. You know what?
It really is. And just looking at those standings and just to look at how many teams are still involved in the conference title mix, I guess that is one sort of advantage, is that more teams are involved. It's not so clear cut when you have the divisions, East and West. It was with the crossover games. I think by this point of the season, you had a pretty good idea of who was going to make the conference championship game. But with Vanderbilt sitting there with 2 losses, Alabama, Ole Miss, I mean, Alabama with 2 losses in the SEC at this point of the year is pretty surprising too. So just in general, it feels way more wide open. It feels like we have way more teams involved, which also adds to the stakes of some of these games, because you're not only looking at the SEC championship game, you're looking at the playoff, you're looking at seeding. So man, there's still a lot at stake. We've got, 4 more weeks of the regular season and championship Saturday. So just a little visual. If you think like 5 weeks, think back to 5 weeks ago, and Vanderbilt was putting the goalpost in the river. So there's a lot that can happen in the next couple weeks of the season.
All right, so let's get into your latest college football playoff projections. And I was just Saturday night, Stephen, I was sitting around and I was like, man, good luck to Stephen putting this thing together, because I don't really care about the other conferences. I'm sure they got fine teams, but I was seeing Big 12 upsets. I was seeing, Big 10 games, between some of their best teams. Of course, SEC. It doesn't matter. It seems like every other week there's an elite team and a team at the top falling down the standings. So, without further ado, this is Steven's projections. This is a little bit of a look ahead and where things currently stand. But BYU, that jumps off the page at me, Steven. I'm sorry, I had to start there. He doesn't have BYU number 1, but he does have BYU number 4, getting a first round bye. And again, I say this every time, just in case there's new listeners out there unfamiliar with this new format. The top 4 seeds, not even necessarily the top 4 teams in the poll. They're doing it pretty crazy. It's the highest ranked conference champions will get the top 4 spots. Steven's got Oregon number 1 as a projected Big 10 champ. Georgia number 2 is the projected SEC champ. Miami projected 3 seed, projected ACC champ. And again, BYU 4, which I think they're in a Big 12. You correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen. There's so much. Right. There's so much movement. So who in the world knows? And then Stephen's got Ohio State. I believe they kicked up a couple spots. They're number 5 now, facing Boise State, number 12, and that would be a home game for Ohio State. Stephen's got Texas at the 6th seed, hosting number 11 Alabama. Stephen, Alabama didn't even play, and they moved into your power rate. You're as corrupt as the committee over here. Penn State, number 7, hosting number 10 Indiana. And then Notre Dame. How about that one, Stephen? Number 8, Notre Dame hosting number 9 Tennessee. You got to flip those. You got to flip those to get my approval here. But that would be quite the sight to see. And then A&M's fallen out of Stevens' projected playoff field, but they are one of the top teams, if not the top team on the bubble, as well as LSU, and Ole Miss is down there. I'll shut up now, Steven, and give us some insight into why you went with these teams and these selections.
To give you an idea of how crazy the conference champions thing is as the top 4 seeds. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's a very good idea to reward conference champions. We'll use ESPN's Football Power Index, but BYU is the 28th ranked best team according to ESPN's Football Power Index. So if you're just ranking these on neutral field, Ole Miss is like way ahead of BYU, but that's the system that we have. So I'll promise I'll keep my complaints about this to a minimum down the stretch. But I think just looking at the playoff field, LSU versus Alabama looks like a play-in game to me. You look at both teams' schedules the rest of the way; they're going to be favored. So the winner of that game is probably going to get in. Texas A&M is out, but certainly not out of the mix at all. They can play their way in. They could beat Texas. There's some other chaos that could still happen. Mike, you mentioned it. The Big 12 teams, they lost. Iowa State lost on Saturday. Pittsburgh lost to SMU. We also saw Penn State get knocked from the ranks of the unbeaten by Ohio State. So we had 3 unbeaten teams lose on Saturday. We still have a lot of losing to go around. So I think right now, 4 SEC teams looking pretty good to get in. Wouldn't surprise me to see a 5th get in. And if you're rooting for that to happen, number 1, Ole Miss has probably got to beat Georgia, but you also have to have a little bit of chaos around you. That may help by getting Indiana to lose twice, some more Big 12 chaos, start knocking off some of those contenders for the bubble. So right now, 4.5 looks like the over-under on SEC teams in the playoff, with LSU, Alabama looming very large, and we will give Ole Miss a chance to play their way in this week against Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's kick up their schedule. The remaining for the Ole Miss Rebels, they host Georgia, of course. We're going to preview that game in just a minute, at Florida and Mississippi State in Oxford for the Egg Bowl. So win out, and they'll have a shot with that. They'll have that signature win over for Georgia. How about this, Stephen? Again, I know this is not your job or anything, and I'm just throwing this at you at the spur of the moment here, but I have a strong suspicion that South Carolina will be ranked in the top 25 by the committee, and if they are, that's another ranked win that is not perceived as a ranked win today, but I think it could be by tomorrow. Am I off base saying South Carolina will be in the top 25 of the playoff committee?
I think they should be. Frankly, I rank them as a top 25 team, Mike. I think their win on Saturday night over Texas A&M is worth bumping them into the top 25. But it's not just that. It's that they've had close calls against good teams. I mean, LSU, Alabama. Personally, I can tell you from doing the top 25 every week, the bottom of the top 25 gets really thin on options. And if you're not ranking South Carolina because they have 3 losses and not looking at the wins or the close calls, you're probably doing a disservice to the ranking. So I think South Carolina should be in. So to your point, that does help Ole Miss. I still think you want to be 10-2 at the end of the year. I don't think 9-3 is going to get you in unless you have some chaos.
Mm-hmm. How about for LSU? What is the path there? Obviously, with 2 losses, you're probably going to have to win out. Thankfully, you got 3 home games to get that done. Alabama, of course. Again, we'll preview that in just a moment. At Florida, Vanderbilt at home, which is that's not a gimme based on the Commodores this year, and then Oklahoma to round out the schedule. So winning out alone may not be enough to get in there, but aside from winning out, what would help to get LSU in there?
I think winning out likely gets them in, but I don't think it's guaranteed. And I think you can look at what happens with Texas A&M. Does Texas A&M lose to Texas? Do they beat Texas? LSU does not have the tiebreaker over A&M. So it almost feels like there's probably one spot for LSU or Texas A&M or Alabama right now, depending on how things break. So I think winning out, number one, it's important because you already have 2 losses, but also I don't know how much style points matter here, but maybe compiling some of them against Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma. They're games where LSU is going to be favored in. I don't think you want 3 consecutive close calls. I think you just want to take care of business. Also, probably need South Carolina to keep winning. Like we talked about, they should be ranked. So a win over a ranked South Carolina, win over a ranked Ole Miss team, all those can help LSU make the case. So 10-2. I think probably gets them in. Honestly, in this week's projection, where Alabama is, basically insert the winner of that game. And the reason why I went with Alabama was because they're the early favorite in Vegas. So just basically the winner of that game probably slots in there next week.
Mm-hmm. How about, again, this is maybe looking too far ahead. If you were a coach, you wouldn't answer this question, but thankfully you're not, Stephen. Texas at Texas A&M. Is that now that A&M has fallen in conference play, that they're still first overall, but is that now a win you're in, a loss you're done for both, or can Texas even? Texas only got one loss. They don't have two losses like A&M. Can Texas survive a loss to A&M and get in? Can A&M survive a loss? What's your thoughts there?
I think if A&M beats Texas and they lose the SEC championship game, I think they're probably getting in over Texas. Wouldn't you agree?
I don't know, Steven. I don't know. That third loss, that's going to be the $1 million question is what happens in these championships. Do they dock a team in a conference championship? Fair or not, Steven, even if it's like a 30-point loss, which, again, that's a really bad loss, but it would be against an elite team. We really docking teams that are, and then we're rewarding teams that are not playing. I don't know. I'm just thankful I don't have to make those decisions.
I don't think A&M should be penalized if they make the SEC championship game and lose, because at that point you're probably playing a ranked number 1, number 2 Georgia team, and you would have a victory over LSU and you would have a victory over Texas, and your one loss outside of that is to Notre Dame in the first game of the season, and then to an improving plus likely top 25 South Carolina team. So there's really no shame in Texas A&M's resume. I think the interesting argument, which we've talked about this too, is what happens with Texas, because at 2 losses, your best or your ranked win is probably over Vanderbilt at that point, and you need Vanderbilt to keep winning. They have some really solid victories, like Michigan. It's on the road. I know Michigan's not very good, but winning in Ann Arbor is a good victory. You throw in Oklahoma, at Arkansas potentially, but that resume is pretty light on top 25 victories right now. So Texas at 10-2 would be an interesting case study. Now, saying that, I think they passed the test that the committee has told us they're going to use, which is picking the best teams. Because if you're picking the best teams, Texas passes all those metric tests that they're going to look at when they're deciding these last couple spots.
How about this? I love this idea from Cousin Bo, Stephen. Instead of 1 versus 2 in the SEC championship, how about 5 versus 6? And it's a playoff game for the playoff. That may be even more interesting. I don't know. What's your thoughts there?
So I guess what you're kind of going for is taking 2 teams that are on the bubble and giving them a chance to get a win, right? Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's better than like, let's watch Georgia and Texas again, and then if they're the 2 best teams, we may see it for a third time. How interesting is that? I don't know.
So that kind of gets at the idea of the SEC and Big Ten, I think, asking for automatic bids, but down the road in like the 12 or 14 team playoff in 2 years, because then you could set up a scenario like that. You could just say like, hey, if you're top 3 in the standings, you're automatically in, and then we're going to have a play-in game for the other spot. So, there is still something to be said about winning an SEC championship. Like the game in Atlanta is a pretty big deal. I know conference championship games have probably lost their appeal a little bit, but still, to be able to say your SEC champion is a big deal and it's a moneymaker. They're not going to get rid of it anytime soon, but I love the idea. Let's create some extra playing games, right?
Right. Hey, shout out Cousin Rick. Appreciate you, brother. He just gave us $10. Congrats to the Gamecocks. Well-deserved victory. Gig 'em. So I appreciate you, Rick. And as always, Cousin JR, you got your shirt coming to you. Appreciate you, brother. He just gifted a membership to Isaac Trevino. Isaac, welcome to the family. And I love this comment from Marshall. Stephen, how about this? We could sit here and wonder which 2 or 3 loss SEC team makes the playoff, but the playoff committee really can the playoff committee really justify Indiana, Miami, BYU being able to beat those teams? I don't see it. Maybe I'm too biased, but the SEC strength of schedule is unbeatable. I 100% agree with Marshall. What say you, Stephen?
100% agree. I used Ole Miss as the example. I mean, personally, if Ole Miss is playing BYU or Indiana in a playoff game, I'm taking Ole Miss to win and probably cover. I don't know what the spread would be, but I would take them. I think there's almost like a difference. You see this in the committee is sort of power rankings versus like your resume. And there will be some of that parsing in the playoff rankings this week and at the end of it. So I think if you look at what Indiana has done and BYU, they've run the table so far, that will count for something. And also the losses for Ole Miss. So while I agree, the committee will have to vote some on resume, and that's why you're going to see the 2-loss or 3-loss Ole Miss team get left out if that's the case.
Well, I am glad you said those two teams, Stephen, because while you were talking, I looked up their schedules. I'm gonna read them off here because I literally had no. I mean, I heard they were bad, but this is the first time I'm looking at it. Here's BYU schedule: Southern Illinois. I don't even know if that's FBS team. I don't think it is.
FCS, yeah.
At SMU, which, okay, beat them by 3. Apparently, that's a good team. At Wyoming. Wow, that's terrific. Kansas State. At Baylor, who's about to fire their coach, maybe. Arizona with the new coach. Oklahoma State, who their coach came out today and said, yeah, we're 3-6, but that's the fault of lazy Americans that can't take care of themselves. He literally said that. And then at UCF, oh, what a murder. There's one ranked team on here. So, yeah, let's just march BYU into the playoff, which I think if Auburn faced this schedule, even Hugh Freeze would have a winning record. And then here's Indiana's schedule. FIU, I mean, what league? Who knows? Western Illinois, is that even an American football team? I don't know. At UCLA, oh, that's a quality win. Charlotte's a football team. Maryland, at Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, not last year's Washington, this year's Washington, at Michigan State. I don't see a ranked team on here, Stephen.
It comes up in 3 weeks when they play Ohio State and will probably get beat. So yeah. I mean,
Good night.
This is, and this kind of gets at what, we were talking about with teams on the bubble. I think if you're an SEC fan who wants to see Texas A&M, LSU, Tennessee, any of these bubble teams, you're rooting for Indiana to lose. You're rooting for BYU. You're to lose and root for other Big 12 chaos, because I will tell you that there's a certain team out in Boulder, Colorado that is very much in the mix to win the Big 12, and Coach Prime bringing the Buffaloes to the college football playoff is a very realistic scenario. So I say this every year, is that it's all going to work itself out. There's going to be some upsets. We saw it last weekend. We've seen it all season. So I would say, don't let it get your blood pressure up just yet. Check back with me in a few weeks.
Too late. No, I'm just kidding. No. All right. But for those that are not currently seated in the playoffs, Steven's also got his updated bowl projections. Can you run those down for us real quick?
Absolutely. Let's start with the Las Vegas Bowl and those Colorado Buffaloes playing Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt.
Ooh, oh man!
Sign me up for that one. The internet may explode after seeing Colorado and Dion take on Diego Pavia. So the Commodores squarely in a bowl game, 6 wins now. The question is where. I've got them in the Las Vegas Bowl playing Colorado. Over in the Liberty Bowl, same matchup as last week. West Virginia and Missouri. In the ReliaQuest Bowl, Ole Miss versus Minnesota, our traditional SEC Big Ten showdowns on January 1st or so. Over in the Music City Bowl, same matchup as last week. South Carolina versus Illinois and Burt Bielema. So if you want to get a little revenge over Burt, there's your chance in South Carolina. In the Gator Bowl, believe it's the same matchup as we projected last week. LSU versus SMU. SMU's in the ACC. They are also in the playoff bubble discussion. So just keep an eye on how SMU season plays out, because that could impact some SEC teams. And 2 more in the Texas Bowl, Texas Tech versus Arkansas. And in the Citrus Bowl, Iowa versus Texas A&M.
How does Iowa make the Citrus Bowl every year?
Question, because I'm not kidding. I spent a significant amount of time on Sunday trying to figure out what the Big Ten bylaws are on teams returning to bowl games. So the only thing that I kind of settled on right now is Iowa is one of the, in terms of wins and losses, they're probably going to be head and shoulders above some of these other teams.
Okay. I mean, every year it's Tennessee, it's South Carolina, it's Auburn. It just seems like they're there literally every year. That's the one game a year I watch about Iowa, and they score 6-0 points.
That was more Iowa Big Ten Bowl knowledge than you ever need to know, right?
Well, yeah, just talking about Iowa, Steven, it puts me on edge. And you know what I need to get off that edge? Our friends over at Cornbread Hemp. Come on, cornbreadhemp.com/SEC. That'll get you 30% off your entire order over at the Cornbread Hemp. I love their CBD gummies. Steven said you were having some issues sleeping. I cannot recommend these CBD gummies enough. I take them. They help me stay asleep all night long. That's always been my problem my whole life. I can go to sleep decent, but I always wake up in the middle of the night I don't know if the wind blows too hard. I'm up. But these CBD gummies, they help me stay asleep, and I wake up and I'm alert. I'm not groggy all day. So head on over to cornbreadhemp.com/SEC. That's the web address. And the promo code SEC, 30% off your entire order with this Cornbread Hemp. They got some USDA organic THC gummies that are 100% legal, that they'll ship all over the country, right out of the great state of Kentucky. They don't play football in Kentucky anymore, Stephen, but they do bourbon, and they do these gummies that I love. You know what?
Did our friends over at Cornbread Hemp send Mark Stoops some this week?
He needs a truckload of them. You know what?
Yeah, watching the Kentucky offense struggle all year, I think you might need something there. So, is he the coach that needs them the most, or is that like Billy Napier or Hugh Freeze? I guess.
Yeah, I think Billy Napier perhaps with all these quarterback injuries. I think Hugh Freeze, with just losing every single game that he plays in conference, aside from Kentucky. Yeah, no, I'll swing it back because Stoops did lose to Hugh Freeze. So, yeah, Mark Stoops, number one on that list for sure.
I was going to go with maybe Kalen DeBoer. Big game this week. A lot of pressure. The fine bomb stuff's going to be out of control Monday if they lose next week.
It's the coach that loses that game. LSU, right. Alabama. They're going to need it more than anybody. Trust me.
Yeah, our friends over there definitely could maybe just have like a gift bag ready to send to Baton Rouge or Tuscaloosa, right?
Right. Well, speaking of Kentucky, Steven, that is a perfect segue because I have a feeling this coach is going to come up. Let's get with the latest Steven Lassan panic meter across the SEC. Who are you most panicked about in this conference after 10 weeks?
So I'll kind of start on a lighter note here. I had Alabama at a 10 in the panic meter just because of the stakes of this week's game. So you could almost imagine everybody at the facility, Kalen DeBoer after 2 losses, going on the road to LSU and knowing how big of a matchup this is for playoff purposes. So I wanted to start us off on a lighter note because we're going to get into some teams that are really struggling, but I thought Alabama's panic meter is 10 because if they lose this week, they're out of the playoff mix.
Yeah. And man, I know they're recruiting well, but I don't think that's going to save old DeBoer if they drop this one. Imagine. Oh, buddy. I mean, I can't. I'm sitting here trying to think. I mean, they got Mercer after that. They got at Oklahoma, and they got Auburn at home. Let's say they fall to LSU, which is not a given. This is they very well may win against LSU, but let's say they drop that one. What percentage chance would you give Alabama to lose one additional game? And I'm just talking regular season here.
It's a good question. I would probably set it about maybe 30% or so.
Mm-hmm.
Those matchups are pretty favorable, but as we always see, anything can happen in the Iron Bowl. Going on the road to Oklahoma, albeit an Oklahoma team that is struggling. If this season has showed us anything, there is absolutely no gimmies in the SEC.
Right. I'm glad you said that, Steve. And I think you're right. So I'm not sitting here saying, okay, I guarantee they're going to lose 2 more games. But if they're losing LSU, maybe there's more flaws that become exposed. How did Alabama beat LSU last year? Again, I know it's different teams, so maybe that, it's not apples to apples. But if memory serves, Stephen, it was Jalen Milroe going wild, mostly with his leg. I think he rushed for 4 touchdowns.
155 and 4. Yeah.
Right. So if the last time LSU saw the field, what happened? The running quarterback gashed him. So that could happen. But also, if I'm Blake Baker, I'm making $2 million. I'm the most overpaid assistant in the country. You got to think he would lock down on we got to stop this guy from he can't beat us from the pocket. Make him beat us from the pocket. Don't let him run wild. So again, if you lose that game, what do you have to play for? How up are you getting? Meanwhile, you go to the one I have circled is at Oklahoma, because Oklahoma's starting to figure some things out a little bit on the offensive side of the football, in particular.
Desperation for Oklahoma too, maybe trying to get to a bowl game.
No doubt. But I'm thinking also if they win, let's say they win this weekend, which again, not a given by any means at Missouri, they could have some momentum there. They've got a good defense, and that's the thing, Steven. If they're winning, if they're on a 2-game winning streak, they got Alabama. That's going to be an insane home atmosphere. That's the final one. It's an opportunity to really get some momentum. I'm just saying again. You got to favor Alabama, but it's not a given. I don't think.
No, I totally agree with you. I think, like I said, this season has showed us that you have to be at 100%. There's no opportunity to slip, because there are no gimmies in this conference when you go on the road to some of these environments. And we're also at the point of the season where you're starting to see an uptick in coaching questions, transfer portal questions, draft implications. There's I wouldn't say checking out point for some of these rosters, but you do wonder, what do some of these teams have to play for if you're not playing for the college football playoff? There's some other teams in this conference and some others out there. So there's kind of an interesting kind of point that's emerging here, which is some of these teams that don't have anything to play for except for bowl positioning. What kind of effort do they show up with, where you're fighting a desperate Oklahoma team that, hey, if they don't beat Missouri, if they could upset Alabama, they can get to 6 wins, they can get those extra practices. It's a huge opportunity. So the emotion, the sort of effort intensity level is going to be very interesting on some of these teams with nothing to play for if they fall out of the playoff mix.
Right. Oh, shout out. I missed this one. Cousin Bailey just joined the channel. We appreciate you, Cousin Bailey. Hopefully we'll see you at the next family reunion. Who's next, Steven, on the old panic meter here?
Let's stay in the state of Alabama and let's go over to Auburn.
And keep in mind, Steven only goes to 10. So that's why this thing's not out of million or anything like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I apologize because, I think you kind of know what Auburn is at this point of the season. And this could also be higher if we went beyond 10, but it's 10. Mike, if I told you a team outgained another by 100 yards and the other team completed 9 passes and they had trouble in the second and third quarter by completing passes, you would probably tell me the team that gained 100 more yards won the game, correct?
I would.
Yeah. Also, if you running back ran for 278 yards the previous week and he gashes Vanderbilt for a 15-yard run on the first handoff, I might get him more involved. I'm just saying. I know that I'm just sitting on my couch watching these games. I'm just saying. It just seems a little puzzling. So
he was winded, Steven.
Must have been that low energy on the sideline. So Auburn a 10 on the panic meter. I know it's the same old, but I think at some point there has to be a little bit of doubt creeping in about whether or not, yes, you are recruiting well. Yes, you are upgrading the talent, but are those results actually going to come? Because I'll be honest, Mike, I'm pretty skeptical that they're going to be significantly better next year right now. And then that's kind of why my panic meter is high, because I think as each loss piles up and as each puzzling moment piles up, you start to have more doubt creep in.
A little doubt. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, Steven. I mean, what is this guy supposed to come in here and do? He's supposed to come in here to have a high-powered offense. At least that's what I thought. And we have regressed in virtually every statistical count this year. And you can't blame it all on Peyton Thorne. I mean, I couldn't believe there was people defending that. But again, that's either here nor there. That was months ago, but that was easy to see what a disaster that was going to be. But again, we can't blame it all on the quarterback. I mean, they're nonsensical. Steven, were you pulling? I mean, I feel like I was pulling my hair out when the guys called timeout with 2:01 on the like he was totally unaware that there's a 2-minute warning, 2-minute timeout, whatever the hell you want to call it now in college. I think he genuinely did not know that. That's the only explanation that for calling a timeout at 2:01 when the other team's about to punt the football and you're down and you need that time. I mean, it's nonsensical. You said it there. You know, they didn't give Jarquez Hunter the ball. They're not giving Cam Coleman the ball. In the post game, he called out his offensive line. He's called out the quarterback. He's called out the receivers. He's called out everybody. It's never his fault, that we're a disaster over here. And here's the smartest thing. I didn't realize this till recently, Steven. This is what's going to save Auburn. And thankfully, I think it's coming a lot sooner than people realize. But when they did his contract, the smartest thing they did, aside from banning him from Twitter, which if you can't trust the man to run a Twitter account, why in the world did you trust him to run your football program? That's asinine. But what they did, Steven, this is genius. This is what all these they need to do. And Hugh Freeze was so toxic. He's the only one that would agree to this. So they did it. I don't know if you're aware of this, but his buyout, they don't have to give it all to him like some of these guys. Like, you got to give us millions of dollars. And the way his contract works, Steven, he's for the length of the deal, which I think is to 2028, they can pay him monthly installments from now to 2028 to get rid of him. So they don't have to pay a massive buyout. When they handed him a contract, Steven, how bad is this? They knew they were probably going to have to fire him, and they said, well, we can't afford a massive buyout again, so what we're going to do is we're going to break it down till 2028 because this day's coming. So I don't know. That's the smartest thing here with Auburn. So the panic meter won because of the buyout, but everything else is a million.
Was he recruiting when they told him about the 2-minute timeout this year?
But he must have been, Steven, because that's the only thing that explains it.
9 times out of 10, he would have remembered that, I guess. What does it say about the position that Auburn is in? That, I mean, number one, they're averaging 8 fewer points a game in SEC play than they did last year. They should have been better in year 2. Also, what does it say about Clark Lee and the job that he's doing, that they went from as bad as they were last year, largely uncompetitive, to going on the road and winning a very ugly, but albeit winning 17-7 in SEC play? Like, they found a way to win when they weren't playing at their best. Vanderbilt's offense was pretty much shut down by Auburn. And so the fact that Vanderbilt, after all how bad they were last year, they have come this far to be that much better, to go on the road and play a C game maybe and win, I think speaks a lot about both coaching staffs right now.
Right. And I mean, he fired the offensive coordinator and took over play calling. So it's gotten worse. Oh man. I think they're tired of us talking about Hugh Freeze. So we want to shout out Liquid Flames. He just gifted a membership to cousin Grant. Welcome, Grant, to the family. But yeah, I mean, it's a disaster. It's not going to last much longer. So at least hopefully. Here's the thing. I want Auburn to be good. It's not good for the SEC for Auburn to be in a tank, but they're going to stay there as long as Hugh's there. Who's next on the panic meter, Steven?
Let's go with a little bit lower of a panic meter, but a team that lost on Saturday. Let's go with Texas A&M. Let's put it about a 5. I think it's Saturday's loss. I think there was some kind of big picture things that showed up in that game, and they were kind of going back to what we talked about with schedules. There's no easy week in the SEC. If you don't show up with your A game on the road against South Carolina, a pretty good team that might be a little bit undervalued in the rankings, you're going to get beat. And we saw that with Texas A&M. It just felt like South Carolina, coming off the off week, was fresh. They were ready to go. I think they were a little bit more physical than Texas A&M, which for the most part, A&M's been the more physical team all year. But I'm not panicking too much here because there's a path to the SEC championship game. I still think Mike Elko and his coaching staff, things are different at College Station than they were under Jimbo Fisher. They will get this program and this team figured out. But still, they missed an opportunity to sort of entrench their place at the top of the SEC. So you have to panic a little bit, but you're not panicking a lot because you still have an opportunity to beat Texas in a few weeks and go to the SEC championship game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, if they go 10-2, which again, a big if here, but that's still a heck of a year, Steven. But you know, the lopsidedness, getting dominated in the second half. I was listening to Texags. They did their Sunday recap, and I mean, you could shoulda, coulda, woulda, anything. So it's not my favorite thing to sit here and do, but this game could have been a lot different had they actually made some of these sacks that they. I mean, I think the stat was Sellers broke 12 tackles. I mean, it was insane. It's like they forgot how to tackle or something, and that, because Shane mentioned on the last show, that's not all Mike Elko. They're designing plays that they're getting to the quarterback. They're just not taking him down. So I don't know that game was, you know, all the credit in the world to South Carolina. I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but I don't know. I just, even though the final margin was so wide, it felt like two teams, to your point, that are close to the same team, and one team has gotten the breaks this year and one team hasn't. And that's not to say luck or anything like that, because I think you make your breaks in this game, particularly in the SEC. But I think it speaks to how close South Carolina, which was, you know, I don't want to say second tier, but if you put it into thirds, they were probably certainly in the second third to the lower second third, and Texas A&M was at the top. It just goes to show you how there's virtually no margin between any of these teams.
And also, there's been this trend we've seen with Alabama beats Georgia. They go on the road, lose to Vanderbilt. We saw LSU, of course, beat Ole Miss, go on the road, lose to Texas A&M. A&M goes on the road and loses to South Carolina. It just goes to show you that I think so many of these teams are clustered so close together, and you have to play a perfect game on the road at a place like South Carolina to win. But also, a lot of credit to South Carolina, too, because I think you mentioned the missed tackles. I think Pro Football Focus charted them as 25 missed tackles overall by Texas A&M. But not only that, I mean, just I've given Dow Loggins a lot of flack, and I thought that he called a pretty good game on Saturday night. And you know, the growth of Lenore Sellers is, if you watch each week, you can see him starting to take a little bit more ownership of this offense. And then Rocket Sanders looking like Rocket Sanders that we saw at Arkansas. So it had almost, I think the fact that South Carolina lost to Ole Miss by 20-something points kind of threw us off a little bit, because they were close to beating LSU and Alabama. So it's almost like they were due for one of these at home. I think maybe in the bigger picture, one thing that worries me with A&M is the running back depth, because now you've lost Reuben Owens, you've lost Le'Veon Moss. You got to keep Amari Daniels healthy. Terry Bussey may take some handoffs too, but in the big picture, it's a loss and it hurts, but everything is still on the table for Texas A&M, and they can continue to get better from here, I think.
Right, and you referenced this just now, but Le'Veon Moss, for anybody that missed it, they announced he's unfortunately done for the season due to that injury. But it sounds like they could be getting back Reuben Owens, potentially. Now, that's certainly not a guarantee, and there's been many times when a guy gets injured and, you know, they're trying to work their way back, and you always remain optimistic. Who knows? But, you know, so that's out there. But, yeah, that is certainly an issue. I think the biggest issue, and this goes hand in hand with the missed tackles, but just how well A&M had been doing defending the run. That's what was leading to all these victories, running the football and stopping the run. And I mean, South Carolina set a record for most rushing yards in the Shane Beamer era. So that, I think, was the biggest surprise to me. But I'm sorry, Steven, but the rest of the teams, I don't know. Texas can't run the ball, and Auburn can, but they don't commit to it. So I don't think these teams are positioned to do what South Carolina did.
Yeah, and also I think with that Texas game at the end of the year, I'm going to be, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks where Texas on the offensive line didn't particularly play that well against Georgia. They didn't play well against Vanderbilt, I didn't think. So if you can't run the ball and you're having trouble protecting your quarterback, probably the worst group to do it in the remaining games is against Texas A&M. So there are some matchups there that really, I think, favor Texas A&M down the road on November 30th. But everything is still there for this team. If they can continue to get Marcel Reed to continue to develop, you also have these defensive things that I think you can just clean up. The missed tackles, getting Lenore Sellers to the ground, like those things I think they can clean up. And, to go back to something, I said earlier, I just trust Mike Elko to figure this out. And I'm not taking anything away from South Carolina. It just feels like we've seen this happen in SEC play this year where top ranked teams go on the road, they lose, but they rebound. And I suspect that A&M will be just fine, but it's also a good indicator too of the progress of South Carolina and what could happen the rest of the way, because you look at their schedule, South Carolina could finish out on a winning streak here. Clemson lost to Louisville this weekend. They get a good shot to run the table, I think, the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. And apparently there's a little battle in the comments here, Stephen, on what a hottie toddy is. So shout out Cousin Rick, $20. We're going to say what he said here. A hottie toddy is a mixed drink made with liquor, water, honey, lemon, herbs, and spices. It's often served hot and is sometimes called a hot whiskey in Scotland and southern cough syrup in the southern United States. Google, my friend. So appreciate you, Cousin Rick. And I think there's going to be a lot of hottie toddies drank in Oxford this weekend, especially if they win that game. But all right, who's next on the power rankings, or excuse me, the panic meter?
Let's go with Arkansas. Mike, I've got them as a 7. I don't know if that's fair. Maybe that's too high. Maybe that's too low. I think I guess I'll kind of talk through why I have him as a 7, because I kind of struggle with this one. This year you saw them beat Tennessee at home, but now in the last 2 games they've played against top ranked opponents, LSU and Ole Miss at your place in Fayetteville, been pretty one-sided. Also, I think the defense, which was pretty strong against Tennessee. I know Tennessee's offense isn't great, but 9 yards of play, 562 passing yards. Just the day that Jackson Dart had without Trey Harris is pretty alarming. So it feels almost like you've had these top-ranked teams coming to your place. You got one. You had chances for others. They get Texas later. But it does feel like missed opportunities. And plus, it's kind of one step forward, not really another forward, kind of where is this program going type of thing.
Right. And this is one of the most inconsistent teams in the conference. I mean, heck, they beat Tennessee. They're the only team to beat Tennessee. How about this question from Razorbass? Gave us a donation here. Fun thought. How many teams, Arkansas fan, would have a winning record in the SEC if Diego Pavia was our quarterback? And that's the fascinating thing, Stephen, because I know he was a package deal with Jerry Kill and Tim Beck. I mean, those are his guys. But he has been on record. He says, heck, I've reached out to all these schools, all of them, and none of them got back to me. I don't know if that was this offseason or when, but he has said that many times. So let's not do all these teams. But would Arkansas be better? Because I don't necessarily think Taylon Green is an issue. I think he's just been banged up, and I don't know. Would Arkansas be any better with Diego Pavia?
I don't think so. Being 5-4, I think they're probably about that record. Is that crazy to think?
No, I don't think so at all. Because again, we have seen some tremendous highlights from Taylor. To me, and I didn't watch him really hardly at all aside from highlights at Boise, but he just seems like a work in progress. It's kind of like the nicest way I can say it. And there are times where he is sensational, and then other times he's a little head scratching. So I don't know. I think talent wise, among the starters in the SEC, he is certainly in the top half. But I mean that's not going to make fans feel too great because we're sitting here with a 5-4 record. But I don't know, Steve. I mean, again, big if, but they got 2 weeks to prepare. What happens if they turn around and beat Texas? Aren't we right back where we started from and being like, whoa, wow, I mean, they're coaching these guys up. You know what I mean? It's like, well, wait a second. What about It just seems like every other week it's a bad loss, or then it's an impressive win. I mean, I don't know what in the world to make of this team, but it's just I think it's safe to say this is on the bottom tier of overall talent and depth in this conference. And I believe the over under was like 4.5. So we have already hit the over. Again, I'm not trying to sell people on we need to give Sam Pittman a lifetime extension, but they look a heck of a lot better than they did last year. I'll say that.
I think that's the question for me. I think you use the word inconsistent, and that's kind of the best way to sum up this Arkansas team. But I think just thinking back to the preseason, I think most people kind of was doom and gloom that they only get 4 victories, and they should get to 6 by beating Louisiana Tech in a few weeks. So, on one hand, they've exceeded expectations. On the other, I know that 6-6 isn't what Arkansas fans want. So, I guess the question is, do you trust the staff to be able to get them to that level next season? And an offseason where Taylor Green can develop under Petrino, I think is pretty promising. But I don't think at 5-4 I would change their record if Pavia is the quarterback. I mean, maybe the Oklahoma State game could be a little bit different, but I think they're probably about the same right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, which is not helping things because it seems like we're a little bit stuck in neutral. You know what?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's kind of what interests me down the stretch with this Arkansas team is like you said, you get Texas, Missouri, we'll see what Brady Cook's status is. And then obviously you get Louisiana Tech. Getting Louisiana Tech is going to be crucial just because it gets you to 6, it gets you to a bowl game. But how they play in those other SEC games, I think, will be pretty telling. I think if you're Sam Pittman, you'd like to kind of stack 2 really solid performances together to close out 2024 and kind of show that, hey, things are that they are going in the right direction because we got to 6, but there are some other signs in there within SEC play too.
Mm-hmm. And Jared, I mean, he says if 6-6 exceeds expectations, you need new expectations. Well, I mean, that's good and well to sit here and say, but it's like, again, we don't need to spend all day on Arkansas, but let's just run through real quick. Peanut butter, yeah, you were massive favorites. Oklahoma State underdog on the road. UAB, you were favorites. At Auburn, you're underdog. Texas A&M on a neutral field, you were underdog. Tennessee at home, underdog. LSU at home, underdog. Mississippi State, you're favored. Ole Miss at home, you're underdog. Texas at home, you're underdog. Louisiana Tech, your favorite. And then Mizzou, you're an underdog. So we just went through the entire schedule. They're favored in 4 games. So again, we can't just have blanket statements to say like 6-6. You need new expectations. Well, again, this is Arkansas, and these teams ahead of them are significantly better. Yeah. Now, are they? Is that acceptable year in and year out? No, but this is the way it's broken down right now, and I don't know. I just think that's a foolish statement. You know what I mean? Like, if you gave, I'm trying to think here, like. If you gave Ole Miss Georgia's schedule, let's just do it that way. Clemson, Tennessee Tech, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn. I don't know. I just think I think the standard will be different in case by case. I'm not saying 6-6 every year for Arkansas. I'm struggling to make my point here, but I just think that I don't know when you're exceeding expectations. So. This is the SEC. And you know what happens, Stephen? When you make one bad hire, you get Chad Morris, and it blows up the whole thing. You get Jeremy Pruitt, and it blows up the whole thing. And it can happen to anybody. I mean, Florida has seemingly made 4 bad coaches hires in a row. That used to be a nationally dominant team, and now they're sitting here saying, well, if we get to 6, we're building. You know what I mean? Like it's... everyone always thinks we just we fire the coach, it gets better, but I promise you, I have seen it more often than not. It doesn't always happen that way.
It can definitely get worse. That's the thing. And I think if you're an Arkansas fan, you would take, I guess, some solace in the fact that, hey, they weren't very good last year. Sam Pittman has hired a good offensive coordinator and Bobby Petrino. They have invested in the portal. They're clearly better than last season. I know it's not 9 wins, and the SEC is only getting harder without divisions and Texas and Oklahoma coming in. So there is kind of I wonder what is the level kind of at Arkansas for year in and year out expectations. But I do think they're, like I said, they're clearly better, and how they finish and just getting to 6 is going to be important. While we're on the subject of teams that would be better, I think there's one very obvious candidate that Diego Pavia would improve, and that's Auburn. That would be the obvious fit, right? Skip Diego Pavia to Auburn, and they're probably close to making a bowl game. Fair?
And he would not have cost $1.5 million or whatever the heck Hugh Freeze said. I mean, they could have got him for a ham sandwich down there. You know what?
Oh yeah, there's been other quarterbacks that were in the portal that were not, like Curtis Rourke at Ohio, who transferred to Indiana. I think if you're a college football nerd like me, you knew who he was, but at the same time, there's plenty of like good value quarterbacks in the portal. So just only adds to my rising anxiety over Auburn.
Anyone else on the panic meter, Steven?
Let's go with Florida. Obviously, Florida, Auburn kind of falls in the same kind of category here. You kind of know what to expect now at this point of the season. So I've got Florida as a 7 on the panic meter, largely because of, I got to give Billy Napier and the staff some credit, because despite all the injuries, this team is fighting week in and week out. They came close to beating Tennessee. They took care of business against Kentucky. They were leading at halftime against Georgia. Did not expect that at all, given the way the series has gone. So I think this staff is getting the most out of a very difficult roster situation. The question, and I think as we look forward, is that going to be good enough for Napier to get another season? This program almost feels in limbo a little bit. Like, you could make the case that Napier deserves another year because of the injuries. I just don't know if he's the guy to take them to the college football playoff in 2025, and you might just be prolonging a firing that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like they're in a weird purgatory.
Yeah.
Lack of leadership at the university, injuries, they're fighting hard, but they keep losing. Man, I don't envy that position, and that was the last thing I was going to get to you with the panic meter. But I was going to kind of switch gears. This is related, but closely, let's call it a cousin of the panic meter here, Steven. The hot seat meter. Billy Napier, Hugh Freeze, Mark Stoops, and Sam Pittman. How would you rate, if you had to rate those guys, just the same as your panic meter, 1 out of 10? Who is sitting on the hottest seat? Who is sitting on the coolest seat among, again, Hugh Freeze, Mark Stoops, Sam Pittman, and Billy Napier?
I think Napier has to be number 1 on the hottest seat. I would go Pittman at 2, and then I would go Freeze, and then Stoops. I think with Stoops, it's one of the harder jobs in the SEC. He's the winningest coach in program history. I could see him being afforded some time. I think with Pittman, he's got to be number 2 on this list until they get to 6, because then I think that kind of prolongs his tenure. But right. Napier is an easy number 1 for me in this discussion.
Well, needless to say, it sounds like Steven's got a pre-written Billy Napier fired article over there at Athlon. So be ready to read that the moment that happens, huh, Steven?
I would say that is true.
Well, you know what happens, Steven, when you get hot, when you're sitting on one of these hot seats like these coaches, you sweat and you perspire. So you know how to handle that? Head on over to Mando, shopmando.com. What is this? Shop Mando you keep talking about, Mike. Shop Mando is whole body deodorant that's powerful enough for the toughest body odors out there. Go to shopmando.com, promo code SEC, get $5 off your entire order, which is 40% off an entire starter pack. So it's very inexpensive product. We use it over here. We're smelling great, just like this show, Steven. Mando.com, promo code SEC for $5 off over at shopmando.com.
That was a good transition. Hot seat, sweaty coaches to Mando.
You see what I'm trying over here, Steven? I'm trying. But speaking of, getting hot and sweaty and all this, Stephen. It is Elimination Saturday is what we're calling it this weekend in the SEC, because we got some games here, Stephen, where I think if you're at you lose, you're probably done for a lot of these teams. So let's get into the big game here. Got my handy dandy preview here. Georgia on the road at Ole Miss, and how about it, Stephen? The footballs favor Ole Miss, at least by the analytics, because Georgia is. Here's the deal with Georgia, Stephen. We just can't get it out of our heads that this is a team that probably should have won 3 national championships in a row. They got more talent than anybody. They got this coach that is a defensive mastermind that's got 2 rings on his fingers. And Ole Miss got a coach we like to call whiffing because he can't win a big game. But the analytics don't care about any of that. And the analytics say Ole Miss is a better team. And they've been playing better. Again, this isn't talent. This isn't the last couple of years. This is just this year. So I thought this was pretty fascinating when I threw out these numbers. The analytics love Ole Miss. The problem with Ole Miss, they have been failing in a lot of key situations, short yardage. You know, it's fun to see J.J. Pegues run out there, Stephen, and do a little 2-yard run and move the chains. Well, they're doing that because they don't have a running back. I mean, it's almost pathetic. It's almost like they had a star running back and he's on another team that's may win the national championship. But that's neither here nor there, Stephen. How do you look at this matchup? Georgia on the road, a slight favorite, 2.5-point favorite at Ole Miss.
Also, compounding the running back concerns is Henry Parrish's injury against Arkansas on Saturday. Not knowing who's going to be available for Ole Miss at running back. But I think just in the big picture of this game is there's everything here to play for if you're Ole Miss. And you have to feel good after last week's game against Arkansas. I mean, just the fact that the offense was performing at a high level in the passing game without Trey Harris. So maybe they get Trey Harris back this week, adding to the other weapons that they had. Jordan Watkins with the huge game last Saturday. We've seen that Georgia has been a little bit vulnerable in the secondary at times. In sort of the big picture here, there's kind of the question of which version of these two teams are we going to get? Because Georgia, at its best, looks like the best team in college football, but they have been inconsistent. And Ole Miss has the potential, and the odds makers clearly agree because the spread is quite low. They have a chance with Georgia coming to Oxford with an improved defense, a red-hot quarterback in Jackson Dart, to kind of state their case, win the game, and potentially go to the college football playoff. So it really feels like, hey, everything's on the line here for Ole Miss. And for Georgia, you win this game. We've seen them play their A game. I suspect they will bring it on the road to Oxford, but they would move one step closer to the SEC championship game if they can win this one.
Yeah, but all I can think about this week, Stephen, thinking about this game, is Kirby gets his guys up for these big games. And it's almost the exact opposite for Kiffin. He cannot win a big game to save his life. Is it too simple to break it down into that? I mean, I don't know, even if you're a big Ole Miss fan, how you can have faith in your team to get this done when you've not seen it. Is that fair or not?
I think that's fair. The fact that they are an underdog here, kind of, I think, I'm not going to knock him too much if it's like a close loss, but at the same time, if they get blown out, given the circumstances of this game and sort of the team that they had, I mean, we've joked about it, but the last dance, I mean, this would be like, the Bulls being like the 8 seed or completely missing the playoff with all their key pieces back if they fall short here. I mean, because they shouldn't have lost to Kentucky a few weeks ago. But I think Ole Miss has the pieces here to make this interesting. With the defensive front, how good this defense has been all season. Pete Golding doing a great job with that group. The other question, and I think the matchup that's going to swing kind of how it's decided, is can Ole Miss just simply block Georgia's defensive front?
Mm-hmm.
They were all over the line of scrimmage against Texas, and if that happens here, Ole Miss is not winning this game. That's kind of I know for all that we talk about the quarterbacks and how much Carson Beck has struggled, but to me, it's still a line of scrimmage game.
Right. And perhaps the most surprising statistic for both these teams, Georgia, number 32 in rush offense efficiency. Ole Miss, number 59 in rush offense efficiency. Believe it or not, Lane Kiffin's bread and butter is the ground game. And it's not been there this year. Now it's injuries, it's ineffective offensive line. And for Georgia, I mean, they've had some injuries as well, Stephen, but it's, they love to run the football and they love to hit you over the top with play action. You can't run play action effectively if you can't run the football. So, yeah, I think you said something really smart there because I think Ole Miss, believe it or not, has the edge when it's their front seven going up against Georgia's offense. And that's why they're relying on Carson Beck to make all these plays, and he keeps turning the ball over. And that's keeping teams in it. So if Carson Beck has a bunch of turnovers, I think they will lose this game. I really do. Now, there's no guarantee that'll happen, but he does lead the SEC in interceptions. But I also, to your point, I don't know that I have a ton of confidence in Jackson Dart to just sit back and throw 40 times. I mean, Georgia's defense is going to tee off on him. So I don't know who to pick here.
Mike, I think the calendar is also important here because Ole Miss has an off week before playing Florida. Here's why I think that's important. This is a empty the tank game for me. If I got to run Jackson Dart 25 times, I'm doing it. Because if you have to win this game, like your back is against the wall, there's no coming back. If you go 9-3, I don't think you have any chance to make the playoff. So if you have to run Jackson Dart to manufacture a ground game, you've got to do it 25 times, whatever it is. So I think the way that this game sets up, Ole Miss, we'll see if they get Trey Harris back, but you can run the quarterback. You throw everything into this game because if you win this one, you're favored in the next two and you're probably making the playoffs. So I think the calendar works in Ole Miss's favor. I think on the Georgia side, Carson Beck, 8 interceptions in the last 3 games. He's at 11 for the season. And did you catch that on the broadcast about how Herb Street was pointing out the receiver and the quarterback weren't on the same page? And it's November at this point of the season. So it's a little confusing sometimes to see some of these issues that they're having in the passing game. And it feels like at times Carson Beck is just forcing the issue. And maybe after the close call against Florida, maybe they'll dial it back a little bit and get him to take some of those checkdowns or throw it away. But I think Ole Miss has got to score early, build some confidence, and keep that crowd in it. Because I think if they can do that and force some turnovers, I think they got a good chance here.
One thing that also concerns me, though, is the Ole Miss kicking game. It's been a little inconsistent this season, and you got to imagine a game like this is going to come down to, it's going to be a tight ball game. And if Ole Miss wins it, they may have to make a kick or two to win this one. And I don't know that I have faith in their kicker to get that done. Is that fair?
He's 15 of 18 this year, I think. And the big miss, of course, was the Kentucky game. But yeah, I think maybe what you're kind of getting at is I think Ole Miss is going to have to bring its A+ game in all 3 areas. And if they have a bad day on special teams, there's really no margin for error. Georgia has a better roster. They are favored. They probably should win this game for a reason. So I think, like I said, it's one of those empty the tank games. Everything out of Jackson Dart, you've got to be perfect on special teams. I think this Ole Miss front's going to hold its own, though, with Walter Nolan and all those guys on the defensive front. I think they can cause some problems for Carson Beck, and then maybe that leads to a turnover, which gives you a short field and score. So, man, this game's going to be awesome on Saturday because there's so much at stake and so many individual matchups that are going to be awesome.
The last thing I got for you on this one. High-scoring game, who does that favor? A low-scoring game, which team does that favor?
I'd probably say high-scoring favors Ole Miss. I think lower scoring probably favors Georgia because I would almost trust them to be able to manufacture a little bit of a run game, assuming Henry Parrish doesn't play, that they can maybe grind out a close 24-20 type game.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one, Steven? Speaking of elimination here, Alabama on the road at LSU. Analytics hate LSU this year, but they just keep on winning Well, of course, except for the last time we saw them take the field. Alabama, slight favorite, 2.5 points. Night game. Lane Kiffin can go to hell. This is a night game on Tiger Stadium. It should always be. And I think, I don't know the statistic. Hopefully I'm not making this up, but I think I saw it where I think Brian Kelly's undefeated in night games at Tiger Stadium. So take that for what it's worth. But thoughts on this one, Stephen, in one of the best rivalries in all of college football?
Yeah, the last time that these two teams played at night in Tiger Stadium, that was a fantastic game with Jaden Daniels hitting the 2-point conversion in overtime to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that we get another just back and forth battle here. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is LSU has had 2 weeks to get ready and 2 weeks to figure out a better way to defend a mobile quarterback in Jalen Milroe. On the Alabama side of things, I think that time off was probably good for Jalen Milroe too, because I know they said he wasn't hurt, but he wasn't playing at his best ball that we saw earlier this season. So I think maybe the reset button, a little bit of time off will help Alabama, but it'll also help LSU figure some things out defensively. I think the other thing here is it feels like big plays are probably going to be crucial because I think LSU can move the ball on Alabama's defense. We did see them get a shutout against Missouri. So are they trending in the right direction? The season trend has been the secondary for Alabama has been a problem. Same thing for LSU. Their defense, while it has improved, it's still gettable. So I do wonder if this is a game where Kyron Lacey, Aaron Anderson, Ryan Williams, like the receivers in this game could really break a few big plays. And this game on paper should come down to the wire.
Yeah, but which team or coach, I guess I should say, which could least afford a loss in this game, you think, DeBoer or Brian Kelly?
DeBoer at Washington and not so far in Alabama, but I mean, they usually show up in big games. I mean, they usually play their best on the biggest spotlight, but I will, if I'm looking at this matchup for coaching edge, I'm probably taking Brian Kelly here at home. 2 weeks to get ready for this game. I trust Blake Baker to figure something out better defensively. I would probably lean coaching edge to Brian Kelly here.
And who do you think has got the better defense in this matchup? I think that's could go either way here, but I kind of tend to lean LSU. But again, last time we saw them hit the field, defense cost them big time.
I would probably lean LSU, but I don't feel that strong about it, to be honest with you. I feel like it's pretty close, like 50-50.
Yeah. And how about which quarterback do you, again, before the last game, I would have said Garrett Nussmeier, maybe the best. I think I did say on this show, I think he's playing better than any quarterback in the SEC. Then he comes out here, big road game, throws 3 interceptions. So which quarterback do you trust more in this make or break spot?
I would probably trust Nussmeier, but like the defense, not by much. I think the question for Alabama is, can they get Milroe back to that first half against Georgia that we saw? Because he has not been playing up to that level the last couple weeks. And is that just, the weapons around him? People are figuring out the offense. Is he hurt? There's a lot of other factors in there. So I think that time off will benefit both quarterbacks, but I would probably, if I have to go into battle with one on Saturday night, I'm going to take Nussmeier.
Do you think that LSU receivers versus Bama defensive backs could be the biggest mismatch in this game?
I think this is a pretty good chance. I was trying to think of like what other ones, like, I think Alabama's defensive front will probably create some negative plays, even against a very good LSU offensive line, albeit they're not going to have Garrett Dellinger, who's out for this game. So that's a big loss, but I would think that is probably, LSU's receivers against Alabama's secondary.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing that's missing from this one, and I could be wrong, maybe there's some bad blood that I'm unaware of, but we need Brian Kelly and DeBoer to start like hating each other. We need like a feud to develop or something, because I'm not quite sure that's there. Maybe it's just because they haven't faced each other. To my knowledge, maybe they have, but that I'm sure the players are going to be going at it, but here, yeah, let me let me ask it this way, Stephen, because again, I said which coach needs it more, but Brian Kelly, if he wins this, what is he, 2-3 against Bama? I mean, I think LSU fans will be all aboard there and feeling very confident they got their guy. Meanwhile, DeBoer, I think there's real pressure on him to continue the dominance in this series. So there's quite a bit on the line, I think, for DeBoer in this, as well as Kelly.
Yeah, I think I may have answered your question earlier incorrectly, so I apologize. I think you were asking me about like which coach is under the most pressure in this game,
Right.
and I think that's got to be Kalen DeBoer. You could make an argument for both, obviously, but at 2 losses, and if you lose this game and miss the college football playoff on a program that's been pretty much easy to pencil into the playoff and national championship contender, would be a big concern. We've already seen the defensive issues this season, the T-shirt on the sidelines. I mean, who knows what's going to. So, yeah, I think DeBoer really needs this game because I think if they win this one, we talked about their schedule and there are some landmines, but I think it would kind of signify like, hey, you get to 10-2, you make the playoff, it sort of quiets the noise, and you can finish off with that really impressive recruiting class you got coming in.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one, Stephen? In the preseason, you never would have thought this was potentially a top 25 showdown. We'll find out more about when the playoff rankings come down, but this very well could be South Carolina at Vanderbilt. I mean, they're at worst top 30 teams. I mean, they're right there. Carolina, slight favorite on the road, 3.5 points on SEC Network, 3:15, 4:15 Eastern time. Thoughts on this series matchup?
2008 was the last time that Vanderbilt beat South Carolina.
Ooh.
I am going to be interested in seeing if the trend continues here. A team gets a big win at home, goes on the road the next week, and they lose. Because we've seen that the last couple of weeks in the SEC. So that bodes well for Vanderbilt. I think at the most basic level, this matchup is really, you've got 2 quarterbacks who can create a lot of plays off schedule against 2 defenses that are pretty good against the run. Vanderbilt's rush defense is better than his pass defense. We saw what South Carolina's defensive front has done all year. So I think which quarterback in this game is going to be able to continue building off of the season that they're having. I know Pavia has been banged up a little bit, but I think Vanderbilt's probably going to need more from their offense and their passing game to beat South Carolina than they used last week against Auburn. So this very much looks like a very lower scoring game where both teams don't get a lot of possessions. It's like converting third downs, scoring touchdowns, which quarterback maybe makes a couple plays probably swings this game.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's fair to say that Vanderbilt's pretty banged up coming into this football game. They looked it last week.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, South Carolina coming off a very physical game of their own, but they were coming off a bye and they looked fresh. So they certainly, I would give them an edge in that department. You wonder if Vanderbilt's running out of gas a little bit, like they're just playing on fumes. That was kind of what I felt last week. And I mean, through most of that game, Steven, I really did think Auburn at times was going to win it, but we know they find ways to lose. Meanwhile, Vanderbilt finds ways to win. So I think that'll be critical. Get this to the fourth quarter. If this is a 1-score ball game in the fourth quarter, I like Vanderbilt to probably find a way to get it done. Doesn't mean South Carolina can't, but I think if you're South Carolina, you got to jump on them. You get on a lead, kind of like Texas did. And I know Vanderbilt came roaring back in that one, but it was too little, too late. That I think is the key to beating Vanderbilt the way they're playing right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and especially for a style game. We know what Vanderbilt wants to do, which is, slow the pace down, low possessions. That way we saw it against, was it Texas a few weeks ago or in Alabama, like the game that they want to play. This is Vanderbilt's 6th consecutive game. They played Ball State in that stretch, but still, that's a lot of SEC teams, and a lot of emotional highs with the Alabama game and Texas coming in and on the road against Auburn last week. So I think they get an off week after this, but also you could also kind of see the emotions here. Vanderbilt, tough stretch. You've got South Carolina. They are coming off an emotional home victory. They were able to use that to their advantage. How can they handle that on the road and give that same type of A+ effort? Because they're going to need it to beat Vanderbilt, which we've seen. They've already knocked off Alabama at home, almost knocked off Texas. They got a good chance to get this one on Saturday, too.
Yeah, South Carolina's defensive ends against Diego Pavia. That's going to be really fun to see. You know what?
Yeah, it really is. It goes kind of to the creativity of the two quarterbacks here. Like, I think Pavia is going to have a bigger effort for Vanderbilt to win this game. Like, I think South Carolina can probably lean on its defense and maybe some Sanders runs in there. But I think for Vanderbilt to win, I know it's kind of stating the obvious, they're going to have to work around the Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard, and it starts with Pavia kind of creating some magic on Saturday.
Right, and that's my final thought. Of course, it's a mismatch for Vanderbilt, but there's ways you can scheme around it, and I think that's kind of what they did to A&M. You scheme around aggressiveness because you know 1-on-1 you're not going to be able to block them, and leave Tim Beck, Diego Pavia, and company. Give them some time. I'll be fascinated to see what they come up with. All right, how about this one, Steven? I guess rivalry, not a rivalry. I don't know who in the world knows. Oklahoma at Missouri. Missouri, a slight favorite at home. Night game, SEC Network. Both these teams going to want this one really bad. Oklahoma needs it to reach a bowl game. Mizzou needs it to save face, and still don't know the status of Brady Cook. How does this one play out if he plays, and how does it play out if he doesn't?
Yeah, that's the big question with this game is what does Brady Cook play or not? Because I think if Brady Cook does play, it definitely trends in favor of Missouri. I mean, it's almost one of those, if Brady Cook is less than 100%, I still think at home in this matchup, he will just will Missouri to a victory. We saw this a few weeks ago against Auburn. If he doesn't play, then I think we get very much into a 50-50 kind of battle here because Oklahoma's defense against Drew Pine and anything else that Missouri wants to throw out there is very much a low scoring affair. So I think Brady Cook's status sort of trends where this game goes. If he plays, I like Missouri. If he doesn't, I think we're very much in a 50-50 game. If I'm Missouri, I'd almost be tempted if Brady Cook can't play to just let Luther Burden play quarterback and let him run it 50 times or whatever you got to do out of the Wildcat to win this one. But I think just on paper, whether Cook is in there or not, it really looks like a very low scoring matchup just based upon the defenses and the way these two teams have been playing this year.
Who do you think has the better defense in this matchup? Because I certainly think both of these defenses are the better portion of their team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just looking, both of these defenses are top 20 in the nation in defensive success rate this year. So this is definitely a strength on strength battle between the two defenses. I'd probably give a slight edge maybe to Oklahoma, but I don't feel, really strong about it. They're both pretty comparable on the stat sheet. I would probably lean Sooners, but close.
Mm-hmm. And then anything stand out to you about the Oklahoma offense with the change at coordinator? And I know, it's last week was Maine, so I mean they kind of did whatever they wanted to them. And then the week prior, Ole Miss, for a half they looked very competent. Of course, the second half they didn't. But to me, Jackson Arnold has stood out, and Javonte Barnes last week had an epic game. But again, I get it. It was against Maine, but they look far more competent, in my opinion. What's your thoughts of Oklahoma's offense in recent weeks?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also I think just from a style or game plan thing, it really feels like they are trying to get something going on the ground game. I know it's like a basic observation, but I noticed going through the stats the last 2 weeks, they've had 102 rushing attempts. They've been at 50 and 52. That is the highest rushing attempts that they've had this season. So you can clearly see that they are, kind of shifting a little bit or trying to figure that out in order to jumpstart this offense. And of course, Jackson Arnold's legs were a big part of the game against Ole Miss 2 weeks ago. So if anything, it feels like they've got maybe a little bit more confidence. They've got a little bit of better spark in the run game. It's still very much a work in progress with all the injuries on the offensive line and receiving core. But they've looked better, I think, and they've had maybe a better plan the last couple of weeks.
And I know we kind of joke about this sometimes, but could it accurately be said of this game, like the first to 14 points, I mean, may win it?
Yeah. I hate to joke about it, but I mean, seriously, if Brady Cook doesn't play, you could easily see this being like a 13-10 kind of game. Oklahoma has scored 3, 9, and 14 points in its last couple SEC games. So, whatever the total over under is, the under looks pretty appealing to me right now.
Will this, how big of an indictment, let's say Brady Cook does not play, but Missouri still finds a way to win. How big of an indictment, if at all, will that be of Oklahoma's football program right now in the SEC?
It wouldn't be good, I think, at the most basic level, because it feels like in a game like this, if you've watched Missouri play without Brady Cook this year, you know it's been a struggle.
Right.
Even though Oklahoma's offense has issues, it feels like a very winnable game if Brady Cook doesn't play.
Yeah. Well, I just say that because when I was out there, they don't even give Missouri a second thought. They hate to even consider this a team on the same par, essentially. So Brent Venables, this is another one. We didn't talk about him on the hot seat, but he better win this game. I think it's that and I'm talking specifically if Brady Cook doesn't play. If he plays and he balls out, I don't think Oklahoma's got a shot.
Especially because if Brady Cook doesn't play, of your remaining games, this is the most winnable, and it gets you to a bowl game. And I know we joke about this too, but like 6-6 looks a heck of a lot better to me than 5-7. And
Right.
playing in the Birmingham Bowl or the Gasparilla Bowl, whatever it is, it's a heck of a lot better than sitting at home watching all these teams play. So it is a pretty, I think, pivotal moment in Oklahoma's season is to get this game. And, maybe that's something else with this game is like, which one is playing it up as a rivalry? If you're Missouri, play it up. I mean, get the guys ready. You've still got a chance at 10 victories this year. If you're Oklahoma and you take it too light, you walk into a trap in Columbia and, regardless of whether Brady Cook is playing, you get a very motivated Missouri team.
All right. How about Florida at Texas, Steven? Florida's fighting hard. Where's my little graphics here? And then Texas coming off a bye, of course. Here we go. Thoughts on this one? And again, it's difficult to project because we just don't know the status of DJ Lagway. Anybody that missed it, Billy Napier's come out and said, not as significant of an injury as we feared, but I don't know exactly what that means if he's going to play or not. Nobody has clarified that. You know what?
Yeah, it's a hard game to get a read on just because of DJ Lagway's status. I think in the big picture for Texas, it's you've reached the final stretch of the season. You want to kind of put your foot down, pedal to the metal, 100%. Just take care of business here. I mean, you're a big favorite over Florida, regardless of whether Lagway plays or not. Take care of business and move on to the next game and keep inching closer to the college football playoff and the SEC championship game. So I would like to see, if I'm Texas, I want to see a dominant 60 minutes effort. You want to see Quinn Ewers get back on track. I think if you're Florida, they have been fighting week in and week out. And so I suspect that they are going to give Texas the best shot that they can, regardless of who is at quarterback. But the only way they can win this game is if it's a very ugly, very low-scoring game where special teams, maybe on defense, maybe they can pop a big running play. Because I don't think Florida, if Lagway can't play, I just don't think you want to try and trade punches with the Texas offense for 4 quarters. I just don't think they have the firepower to keep up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Florida's only played 2 true road games this season. The competition. They won at Mississippi State and they lost in overtime at Tennessee. But honestly, I feel like they should have won that one. So again, Texas probably, you could argue Texas, Tennessee, but their toughest test to date at Texas. Anything to be said for Florida fighting hard on the road, and again, could very easily be 2-0, but they're 1-1. I don't think they're going to be unprepared to handle the crowd, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suspect that they will play. I guess what interests me the most, and I think this kind of leads us to how does this game play out. Florida's defense has played better the last couple weeks. Now, I do look at it with some skepticism because UCF not playing great on offense outside of their explosion against Arizona last week. Tennessee not playing great. Kentucky, we know they're at the bottom of the SEC, and Georgia turned it over. 3 interceptions by Carson Beck. So I sort of look at it skeptically. But if they play well here at Texas, then I think we have to look at it differently. They're clearly improved. I guess the question is like, what level do you believe in it? So I suspect that Florida will fight hard here, but they are going to have an A plus effort to slow down Texas, and they're also going to have to find a way to get some really short fields with turnovers and maybe special teams, because I just don't have a lot of faith they're going to be able to get long drives. They didn't against Georgia outside of one. I just don't see it happening here against Texas if they don't have DJ Lagway.
Mm-hmm. And then final one here, Stephen. Mississippi State at Tennessee. Tennessee's a big favorite. 24 point. This is the largest spread in the SEC this weekend. 7 o'clock Eastern, ESPN. What's the path to Mississippi State making this a competitive ball game?
I think if I'm Mississippi State, I want to get off to a fast start. And I know that sounds super basic, but seeing how Tennessee's offense just seems to be stuck in the mud in the first half, if you can get ahead early and get a couple takeaways, you've got a chance to make this a much closer game than the spread would indicate. And also, does Tennessee look past Mississippi State because of the Georgia game coming up? I think that's going to be critical for Tennessee. We talked about it earlier. There are no gimmies in the SEC, so do not look past Mississippi State despite the record. A little bit of confidence too for Mississippi State because of the win last week, I think, against UMass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have played a lot of teams down to the wire.
Yeah.
Here in the SEC this season. So there's something to be said for that. And again, this is an opportunity moving forward for much like, well, Arkansas, quite frankly, they didn't capitalize on it by any means, but this is an opportunity to get a signature type win for Jeff Lebby and his program. And that's kind of the way you got to look at it from here on out, I think, when you're facing a team of this caliber. So I think there's a lot on the line. I wonder this young team, how equipped they will be to handle all this crowd noise and whatnot on Neyland Stadium at night. Of course, Kentucky handled it, Florida handled it, but I still think overall talent and experience, there's a massive gap between those teams and Mississippi State. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. And we did the panic meter earlier, but there's a pressure meter here too because of Tennessee. Like Tennessee's supposed to win this game, and I think, and if you're Mississippi State, you're looking at your schedule, you have nothing to lose the rest of the way. They can play loose. They can take some chances because you're not supposed to win this game, and you are an underdog the rest of the season. So, given where these two teams are, I think Mississippi State can come into Knoxville pretty loose, nothing to lose. They can take some chances. And potentially make this interesting, like we saw Kentucky on Saturday night. I think the one battle that does not favor Mississippi State is the line of scrimmage, because if you can't protect Michael Van Buren, much like Kentucky struggled to protect the two quarterbacks on Saturday, if you're having trouble against the run, which they are, here comes Dylan Sampson. It's the lowest rated SEC rush defense, giving up over 200 yards a game. This feels like a big-time matchup for Dylan Sampson to make that late season run at SEC Offensive Player of the Year honors.
Right, and last we saw Mississippi State's defense against an SEC opponent, they gave up, 60-something points to Arkansas at home in Starkville. So, again, Tennessee's off, first Nico couldn't hit the passes. Now he's hitting them. Now they can't catch them. But point being, man, this if Tennessee can't get the offense going against this defense, it's just simply not going to happen. It's just that's how bad Mississippi. I don't even know how their coordinator still has a job. I mean, it's that bad. So if you can't get it going here, you ain't getting it going with a trip upcoming to Georgia and their monsters they got on their defensive side of the football. So I hate to put it this way, Stephen, but this has got to be kind of like a prove it game for Tennessee's offense. Would you buy that?
I was going to say it should be a get right game based upon the stats. I mean, just the way that the way that Mississippi State has played defense, how much they are struggling right now. This should be every opportunity for Tennessee to kick this up into like the 40 points, be able to just simply big plays in the passing game. Dylan Sampson gets going. If they don't, I think to your point, that's number one. It's a big concern against Georgia. It's also a concern against Vanderbilt, and it's just not going to happen this year. I mean, they've been under 30 points in SEC play in every game, which is pretty surprising. Now they have a great defense in Dylan Sampson to kind of continue to lead this team. But every time that I watch the Tennessee this year, I continue to see just small things start adding up. It's like a penalty, it's a fumble, it's a drop pass, it's a miss pass. Like if they can clean the small things up, they should really put on an offensive show on Saturday night. I don't know that's going to happen 100%, but if you get right this weekend, you go into Georgia with a lot more confidence.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen. So we went well beyond 90 minutes here. I appreciate you stopping by and dropping all this knowledge on the Cousins. You got any closing thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I think after talking about week 11 games, I'm even more fired up for these matchups on Saturday because it's going to be a great weekend of SEC ball. We got the playoff rankings, so man, we've hit the home stretch and there's still a lot to figure out.
Well, wait, I figured out one more question. So I'm calling it Elimination Saturday for obvious reasons for Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Ole Miss, even though may not technically be an elimination for Georgia if they were to lose. South Carolina, Vanderbilt, certainly an elimination. But let's focus on Mississippi State, Tennessee, Florida, at Texas. I guess we'll have to do one of these two. Because if Texas loses, if Tennessee loses, they're eliminated as well. I'm not asking you to make a prediction today. You're going to do that on Wednesday. But if one of those teams gets eliminated, which one is more likely, I guess, is the question. Texas or Tennessee to get eliminated during Elimination Saturday?
It's a good question. I almost want to go with Tennessee just because I'm going to guess that Lagway doesn't play, and it's kind of the easy out here. I could also see, and I think Tennessee's the defensive line is going to hold serve at home. But what if Mississippi State hit a couple of big plays early?
Yeah.
What if Van Buren just had the time and they connect with one of their receivers and they get ahead, and Tennessee can't get the offense going even against a bad Mississippi State defense. So a shorthanded Florida team is top to bottom roster wise more talented. But I think if I'll take a quarterback in Van Buren who can create some trouble here.
Well, we just lost Cousin Shane. He's no longer subscribed to the channel, but I appreciate that. Before you go, Stephen, as always, tell the fine folks, how can they follow you? How can they find your work?
You can follow me at athlonsports.com. That's where you can read all my work every week. You can follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven and Stephen L. CFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Stephen. Well, we look forward to it, especially with the playoff rankings coming out. I know you're going to be cranking out all the articles over at Athlon. Appreciate you stopping by. Appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.